everyone, and welcome back to the Genesis Designs and Modelcraft Empty Bench. So next project time, and this is going to be a build of a tornado. It's something I wouldn't say close to my heart, but I've grown up with them being here in the UK. When I was growing up, I lived in Lincolnshire, roughly 10 miles from the Holbeach bombing ranges. So you can imagine in the early 90s the sheer volume and all the different aircraft that used to fly by on the way to and from the said ranges, and tornadoes were a big part of that. So I've long wanted to do a nice job on a tornado kit, but for me personally, a kit hasn't really been around to facilitate that. Not in 1/48th anyway. They've all been quite basic old-fashioned kits, but in recent years we've had a few releases, and I've eventually plumped to buy this Eduard limited edition boxing of the Revell GR1 kit called Desert Babe. Now, being the Eduard edition really means you get some additions. So you've got a bunch of different Gulf War 1 paint schemes, the really fetching semi-permanent sand yellow colouring, but it's the nose art that everybody likes, and this field is going to be of ZA465 Foxy Killer, complete with a shark's mouth and what have you. So that's the aircraft I'm going to build. Now, because this is going to be a build for a client, there will be a load of extras as well. But first off, a quick look at the kit. Now, if you're really interested in the kit, there are plenty of other reviews around, and one of the main things you can get out of them is that this is quite a bitty model. And yeah, where's the tornado bits? Okay, yeah, it's all very unnecessary. The breakdown is quite complicated. Here is the nose, for example. Yeah, normal to have the nose separate like that, except that the lower part of the nose is here. You know, it all has to build up like this, and then the fuselage sides are separate pieces as well. Let me find them for you. All on various different sprues, of course. None of it's all on one sprue. There's the sides. I just get that a bit tighter so you can see the surface detail. And it's worth mentioning this surface detail because it's incredibly inconsistent. So, you know, on the wing parts here it looks quite nice, reasonably crisp, quite decent. On this top, this is an undersurface of the wing, and it's suddenly shallower and less crisp. And then you've got, for example, here, tail planes, some incredibly overdone riveting. The tail planes on a tornado are a honeycomb material, composite. This is like, yeah, right, okay, no need for that. And the other thing this kit features quite heavily, strange in such a modern release, flash. Oh yes, flash. Look at that, all the way around this part, not just that big bit I showed you, but unevennesses and just, being brutally honest, quite poor quality moulding. You've got inconsistent surface textures. It's quite rough in some places, quite smooth in others, and then the surface detail itself, as I've just said, in some places it's quite nice, quite crisp, it's a good depth. I mean, this part here is a case in point. Hopefully, if I can get the camera to pick up on this, if you look at this square here, the left side of the panel, it's quite crisp, quite well engraved, and yet the right side, it's really soft, so I can barely catch it in the light. Really soft, indistinct even. And as I say, then there's the flash and mould seams and everything else. It doesn't shout modern kit to me. But anyway, that's the plastic parts Revell. Eduard then adds, sorry about the rattling, should have pulled these pieces out first, I guess. As they do with their special editions, several decal schemes, several marking schemes. Here's the sheet. Now it does lack stencil detail, obviously, because these were overpainted with this distemper sand colour. So there's your decal sheet. These look like standard Eduard decals rather than these weird ones, but we'll find out later. You can see all the different Gulf Killer, Foxy Killer, Snoopy, Helen, Armoured Charmer, Awesome Annie, Luscious Lizzie and Jack 6. There's a few there, some good selection. Some of the really well known ones and some of the less well known ones. Sheet of masks, as usual. Canopies, wheels. Looks to be just canopies and wheels. Oh, and the little window under the nose on the targeting thing. Photo etch, so there's an internal bit, seat belts and instrument panels, side consoles. They're pre-coloured but not adhesive, and then on the second fret is mostly actually pylon details, which is a nice touch. I'm all over that's good, but this is going to be fully bombed up, so it doesn't matter. Then you get some brass and resin wheels, super nice addition, very happy with that, and a pair of resin ejection seats which lack really seatbelt or cushion detail because that's part of the photo etch set. I'm not a fan of that. I don't really like photo etch seatbelts, not because of any innate lack of ability to use them, but because I don't think they represent seatbelts very well. They're too stiff and they're too flat. So in terms of extras, what have I picked up? An Airs cockpit set. This is the tub from it, and the main difference between this and the kit one is that the level of the detail moulded into these consoles is much greater and there's more relief to it. Needless to say, I won't be covering this up with the Eduard edge. It's also got a nice rendition of the insulation that sits at the back of the cockpit tub there. This also comes with photo etch seat belts for the resin seats, but I already had sitting about a pair of Aero Club resin seats which do have moulded in seat belts, so it may be that I'll use those. I'll basically go through all three sets of seats and pick which ones I like the best and use those. So Airs cockpit, another Airs item, exhaust nozzles, which are absolutely stunning, as they always tend to be actually. Whether they'll fit or not, we shall see. So we've got Airs exhaust nozzles, master brass pitot and angle of attack vanes, no brainer. Always use master parts when they're available because they're just beautiful and massively more robust than the plastic equivalents. I got some quick boost resin undercarriage doors purely because the internal detail is a bit nicer than the kit, but also the kit parts are riddled with ejector pin marks and just mould irregularities, which be quite time consuming to clean up. So for the sake of a couple of quid on some resin doors, it saves you all that time. Coming towards the end, I've got a pair of Res Kit Paveway 2s. So the loadout on this, I did some research. Obviously the Boz pod and the Sky Shadow pod are a given. Then you've got the 2250 litre tanks, or big tanks, or the F3 tanks if you like. And then you've got bombs. So early in the conflict they used the JP233 runway denial weapons. And then they've switched to various other fits as the conflict went on. And I chose to use the Paveway 2 rather than iron bombs. So this is a pair of resin ones by Res Kit, and they're really lovely actually, very nicely made. and won't need any work other than assembling. Lovely. 3D printed. These are cast in resin, but the masters are clearly 3D printed. That's obviously going to get more and more of the thing as we go forwards. And lastly, some AIM-9s. The inboard pylons as well as the tanks carried an AIM-9 on each pylon. And the brass ones are Divine, and they were here, so that's what we shall use, a pair of those. No wheel wells or any of that, and any other additions, and there will be many, will be scratch built by yours truly. The main reference that I have at the moment, there may be a few others, I've got an aero guide kicking around down there, is the Duke Hawkins or the HMH Publications Tornado book. Lots of pictures in here. Nothing of Gulf War vintage. Clearly this is all much more modern. Quite a few pictures from Afghan, such as that one. But they show most of the areas that you would want to see in really quite good detail. And then you've got studies like this one which show the weathering patterns to great effect. So this will cover most things. As I say, I've got an aero guide book in the shelf and probably a couple of others as well to cover that. And where I've made a start, you might think this is odd, but I have actually made a small start already. Is the weapons, or the kit provided elements anyway. I don't know about anyone else, but I always, if I build the model first and then have to do the weapons, I tend to find myself running out of steam a little bit, because the weapons can be quite dull and quite repetitive. Now in this case that's not going to be too bad because there's no more than 2 of anything, but I have started by starting to assemble the weapons. It's one of the big tanks. I've cemented that together ready for continuing work, and what I've done is I've taken, this is the kit BOS pod. Weirdly the kit has 2, although I mean some other air forces do use 2. And here's one on the sprues. It's quite, the surface detail on it's not brilliant. So it's got the fins moulded in, but the price you pay for that is that the inserts required to allow that don't sit flush. So you've got lots of sort of steps and different levels along the length of the pod. Another thing is this half doesn't have the fin bases moulded in, whereas this half does. It's a bit odd. Anyway, the first one has been glued together and I've sanded the joint line, but I couldn't make the irregularities look nice. So what I've ended up doing is I've cut the back end off so that I've been able to smooth it out properly, and I've applied a fairly hefty coat. This is Tamiya basic style putty, this one, thinned with Tamiya extra thin. Just use an old lid and it has to be an old brush because you do ruin them. Bit of Tamiya extra thin, splodge it around to make it thinner, like Mr. Surfacer sort of consistency, and then paint it on. The difference between this and Mr. Surfacer is it hardens up a lot faster when you've got that slightly thicker layer. It hardens up a lot faster and it sticks better because it's thinned with glue basically. This is what Night Shift uses for adding armour texture to tanks, but it actually does work really well for things like this. And what I'm using it for here is to get rid of the heavy-handed rivet detail and nasty scribing on the main body of this dispenser. So when that's all sanded down, I'll add foil to this part. This part's bare metal on the real thing, and stick it back together, and then I will add the fin bases to both sides, and there's also a couple of other small parts, and rescribe it and re-rivet it in a more restrained manner. So that's where I've actually started. I'm going to do the weapons and probably the pylons first. So I then started looking at the cockpit. Obviously I have this airs set, so this is the airs tub, this is the kit tub. there is a pour stub on the bottom of this, so you then, you know, you start jiggling around with it, see what, do I need to take this off? If I don't need to take it off, I'm not going to. A lot of work for no benefit. The first thing I noticed is, well, hang on, this tub includes the top of the front wheel well, so where's that? It's supplied as a separate part in the airs set. And upon closer inspection, you can see that it's a direct copy of the kit part, it's just separate and fits onto the rest of the tub like so. So some of the pour stub, there were some flat pieces there, those I just snipped them off and then trimmed up. So that's that, and that does fit the top of the kit, the rest of the kit wheel bay, absolutely fine. No dramas whatsoever. But that assembles directly onto this lower portion of the fuselage moulding. Here are all the other pieces of the fuselage, incidentally. Yeah, okay. Don't know what they were thinking, really. In fact, I have a theory. I'll tell you in a second. So yeah, it fits directly onto this piece. The kit one fits in that track. So the nose wheel bay goes in there first, and then this all just assembles on top of it, like that. And then you build the rest of the fuselage around it and the intake trunking. But, thinks I need to sort out the surface detail on all of these parts, because as I've already mentioned, it's inconsistent, I think is the best word to use. So that's going to be easier with this part in it especially, but to be fair, with all the parts, that's going to be easier before assembly, so I thought I'll do that first. And here's where I've got to so far. So what I've done is all of that scribe detail, fasten detail, rivet detail, the whole lot, I've been round it and I've cleaned it up. So by cleaned up, that means I've essentially re-scribed the whole thing. Used my Alpha scribing tool, just stick it in the lines, so the panel lines that are already there, and just take it through one pass, two passes, and it cleans out the line and deepens it slightly. This has been used, this is my riveting tool, it's just an old needle in an X-Lite handle. Use that to podge in the bigger rivets, and then the Plus Models pointy scriber does the smaller rivets and also any of the sort of rounded and curved details that the big scriber doesn't want to do. With a cameo roll for a photo etch saw blade, these are really handy for putting panel lines into curved areas. You literally cut it in. So en route to doing this, I started to look at these vents here. As you'd expect, the kit part is quite thick on the end faces, and I could see that the shape wasn't quite right from the photographs I looked at, so I contacted a friend who spent many years working on Tornado GR4s and asked him for some information. So these vents, that's the intake and exhaust vent for the fuel cooled oil coolers, or you can also call them oil warmed fuel warmers. Look it up, wink. He says, well, they're supposed to have a grill on the front, and they're a bit squarer than they look in the kit, and sent me some photographs to prove it. I also noted that the shape, if I look side on, you can maybe see I've changed the shape along the length very slightly. So yeah, I hewed out the thick edges. I fitted the photo etch grill, which the kit does include. At the back, the top of the vent, as with this side, was short shot. It was worse than this one actually. It was like a big semicircle that was missing. So I cut it away completely and put a piece of plastic card in its place, and then I've sanded and shaped and blended that in, so you've now got a nice thin, there we go, nice thin edges and a much squarer shape than we originally had. And that's been enhanced by also adding, you can see it from the inside, a plastic card roof to the vent, because clearly the vent doesn't just disappear off inside. And there, what you see there is a piece of plasticine, which has just been put in there to prevent a completely see-through vent. Now what I'm going to just spray a bit of black paint in there, and once that's in, I'll put a lid across the whole thing, so there's no chance of any sort of daylight or overly hollow effect coming from here behind this vent. So I still have that to do on this side. The other thing I did, this teardrop detail here, that's on the real aircraft. There's a bare metal panel there with a hole in it, and that's essentially an excess bleed air vent, so hot air can come out of there as and when the engine deems it necessary. So I've removed that detail, replaced it with a piece of foil, and obviously drilled a hole in it, which I'll again back up so that there's no hollowness there. And I'm yet to do that this side, so the only part of this left to do still is literally just this little piece here, and then the base plate will be ready for further work several hours in, and this is all I've got to show for it so far, but needs must, and the kit will look greatly better for it, I can assure you. Oh, I forgot to say, I sanded all of this, so after I scribed it, I've sanded the whole surface with 800 grade wet and dry. It's quite a worn piece that probably equates to more like 1000 grit, but you can see how smooth that is now compared to the original finish here. Flash. Yeah. If at least one of you hasn't got Flash Gordon in your head after watching this video, then I have failed. Have I not? So yes, work will continue apace. It's quite dull and tedious at this point, but more updates will follow. Right then, probably the last part of this first video. Making progress slowly but surely. Quite a lot of work gone in now. The lower fuselage portion is complete. All the rescribing's done. Modified both of the fuel cord oil cooler vents. Replaced these teardrop frames with aluminium foil. Just generally tidied everything up. Rescribed the whole thing, and smoothed the surface texture of the plastic across the whole piece. You can see there. I've also done the lid. This is the top part of the fuselage, being fully rescribed, but I haven't yet removed the texture on this side. This has been sanded, this has not. And again, one of the fuselage sides all done. I also on this filled a lot of rivet detail. Now on this fuselage half, if it will focus, there you go. All that rivet detail you can see in the centre area of that panel is quite nice. It's heavy-ish. It's kind of heavy, but it's not too bad. But on this one, it was absolutely horrendous. Really, really deep, heavy, completely inappropriate. So I filled it all, which does mean that I'll have to fill most of this as well. But well, hey ho, these things happen. And I mean, I can show you here as well. If I put these two side by side, this is awkward. You look at the top one that hasn't been fettled, the bottom one, sorry, that hasn't been fettled, and you can maybe see all the kind of flash and nonsense around all the edges. So this, I've been around all of the joint faces, everywhere, removed all the flash, removed all the mould seams, and it's worth it because just get this in position. This is how it fits. Before it looked more like that, and now it just fits. It's a really good, tight, solid join, which essentially looks like a panel line, pretty much. although some of it will still need to be filled because some of the surface detail does not need to be, it goes across it, so I need to get rid of it in places. Notice also fairly significant warpage in the parts there. Yeah, we're going to use glue, so we're not bothered. Okay, these are the two pods, the chaff pod and the ECM pod, Boz and Sky Shadow. They're both, oopsie, basic works complete on both of these now. They've been smoothed, sanded, rescribed, sorted out all the joints and everything else. This one, as you recall, I cut the tail off, cleaned everything up, smoothed everything out, and the tail has gone back on. Still more work to do on that. The Sky Shadow, I cut away that intake completely and moved it across, and also hollowed it out and sorted out the shape a bit, and I've added, it looks to be some kind of exhaust tube this side, and that needs a little fairing making for it, and I also need to create some fairings and other detail that sit here, but that's all to come. And I thinned the fins down massively. They were like barn doors before. Also done one of the tail planes, or tailor-ons if you like. These again had the very heavy detail, so this is why you see this has got Tamiya putty in to get rid of it. And I spent quite a bit of time refining the fit on these and thinning down the leading and trailing edges. On the real Tornado, the trailing edges on these tail planes will cut you pretty much. If you walk into them with, you bang your head on them, you'll hurt yourself. So they were thinned down quite a bit. And again, with the quality control, both tail planes had one or other half with a short shot. See, that one comes to a point, and that one's just got about 3mm missing off the front of it. Very, very poor. Intakes in two halves, full depth, as you can see. You can't really see very far down on the mode because of the shape of them. And what I've been doing on these, they're quite positive when they locate together. So I've been holding them together like this and actually sanding the joint. They're not even glued yet, but you can hold them in position. And I've sanded the joints inside to the point where the joint is level. There is still a seam there that you can see, but the joint is now level. So that will be the least possible amount of work to have to finish when they're put together. So the plan with these now, next step, I will paint the majority of the inside in white and then dirty it up a little bit, then glue them together and then finish the seams. I will also be adding a representation of the auxiliary intake doors from the inside when they're together. Down. And finally, again, I wanted to, this is the two halves of the fin, and I wanted to, they're a really, really good illustration of really the poor quality control, I suppose, and poor moulding generally that's prevalent in this kit so far. If I just plonk them together as if I was going to assemble it, this is the joint that you get, which I think you'll agree is quite bad. Now the reason for that, a bit sniffy today, sorry. Ejector pin circles with huge great lumps of flash on them that need to come off, which is obvious, you can see this. But also, if you're here by this intake, is another ejector pin circle which is quite significantly raised in the surface, and both halves of the fin suffer from this. If that ejector pin is not sanded or cut down completely, you'll never be able to achieve a good joint here. Never. So, and again, the front of this intake is short shot as well. The fin actually does need quite a bit of work generally, because it's much too fat at the top, and whatever the cooler is in here this bulge here is far too pronounced, so there'll be some fairly significant reshaping going on there anyway. But it's just a case in point that the whole kit is like this. All of the joint faces are dirty, lots of sort of mould remnants, scratches in the moulds, and nasty ejector pin circles, seams, you name it. All the joints are like this, so it's kind of like building a really old kit in some ways. And anyway, the main reason I have been working on all these peripherals rather than getting on with it, fitting the cockpit and what have you, is I decided, possibly against everybody's better judgment, to use resin wheelbase for it. These are the kit ones, and everything fits in place quite nicely, but they are really very basic. I looked at some photos, and the real thing, as you'd expect really, the wheelbase are absolutely packed with gubbins. Not a great surprise to anybody, I'm sure, but the kit parts don't really represent them very well. Here you go, gubbins, much gubbins, and structure. So I decided to use some resin wheelbase. Those are on order, should be delivered this coming week, and then I'll go back to working on this. But in fairness, all of this work does still need doing and would have still needed to be done, so it's not wasted time, and it is still easier to perform what I've been doing on the parts before they're all put together really. So that's where we're up to right now. I plan to come back when I'm a bit further on, maybe assembling the fuselage, maybe painting the cockpit, we'll see, but that will be with you in part 2. So for now we're done and dusted here at the Genesis Designs bench, and we'll see you next time. Until then, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.